the Sustainability Management Master's Program, you're answering one simple question. Do you care about your future generation? If you care about your kids, their grandkids, then you care about sustainability. And a sustainability manager is someone who has the tools to make people understand how they can contribute towards developing a sustainable world. We have both part-time and full-time students. Our curriculum is 30 hours. Instead of thesis, we have a research project course and a seminar course which provides them with the kind of research background they will need to be successful in their job. But at the same time, sustainability is not always everything about environment. It also relates to the business. They will take a sustainable business strategies course. They will take a project management course. Most of these courses are going to be taught by industry people, the people who are doing sustainability on a daily basis as a part of their job. Any organization that has a large number of employees and has a physical infrastructure, they will have to have a sustainability office. If you have the passion to develop and maintain a sustainable world, come to us and we will help you shape your passion into a career which will create an impact.
The Stevens Institute of Technology is proud to present the Hugo New Corporation Sustainability Seminar Series, brought to you by Brown and Codwell, Geocetic Consultants, H2M Architect and Engineers, BEM Systems, and Catalyst Group.
Well, thank you again for having us. And yes, green infrastructure, it never gets old, certainly for us. And my background at EPA enabled me to be one of the original team members that developed the green infrastructure approach at EPA. And now, we've got really a global effort here. And we're going to talk today, speaking of global, we were speaking earlier about the pandemic. These are very, very challenging times. We just heard about the 1.9 trillion passed. We're in a depression. How do we make our way out? And one thought related to this particular class is, for any dollars that are going through, and we're going to go over some of those, how it all adds up and how it's adding up globally. Wouldn't it be great if we had global practice, real practice on the principles of sustainability, so that for every dollar, for every target activity or program that these monies are going to, that's been vetted. The principles of sustainability have been vetted so that we continue to move forward, because we're going to have a big debt to pay. And one is as it relates to infrastructure, and particularly stormwater and sustainable stormwater and green infrastructure. So we want to talk about how this relates. Why is it so important not to get lost? And in fact, why it's easy to integrate it into all of these efforts and investments to try to return healing and equity and livability and good in public health with good environmental health. So just a picture today. Latest coronavirus map count, if you looked on the left, there's nearly 30 million cases, 541, almost 542,000 deaths, and nearly 7,000 reported cases of multiple new emerging variants. We heard Governor Murphy actually put some things on pause today because due to these variants and also spring break and actually just fatigue, people, the weather, people are relaxing a bit more. We're starting to tick up, and our healthcare workers are getting very, very concerned about not going back to where we were. So total vaccines, we're at 44 million, well, that's about 13% of the country. We've still got a ways to go. And in fact, Congress has, the amount of money that was just passed is the second largest in history, last being 1945. If you look at the global impacts in terms of the recession, really has been negative GDP growth, all except for China, which is interesting. In 2020, China's GDP grew by 2.3%. So as I alluded to earlier, as we continue to rescue ourselves in this pandemic and the devastating impacts to all aspects of our societies, to people, unfortunately, many have lost lives, but those who are struggling to put food on the table, those businesses that are struggling, those municipalities, etc. And there were those that weren't there before, so they're further behind. But we're looking at a lot of money globally, and I'm just pointing out this in terms of what the UN executive director of the UN program has stated in the past. And if you've been paying attention to Europe in terms of these types of investments, there's still been a concern about climate and resilience, that as money goes into addressing impacts due to the pandemic, that those still support climate resilient projects, circular businesses, not continue to support business that's going to move us backward. As we looked at emissions going down during the pandemic, they're now going up. So how do we do this smarter? And one way is to focus on green recovery, no matter the case. So we're going to talk about one aspect of that green recovery. We often hear renewable energy types of conversations when climate and resilience come up. We don't want to forget about water. We make the relationship when there's a flood or there's a Sandy or hurricane, the devastation in extreme storms and weather events, even droughts or fires out west. When we're thinking of climate effects, but when we are talking about investment, it's interesting that I still hear everything related more to energy and renewable energy. And it's World Water Week. Please, let's remember that if we did not have safe, clean water, it is not a hydrologic cycle like everyone thinks. I'm still reading statements where people think it just, continues to renew itself. And that's not the case, particularly when we continue to pollute it. So nature-based solutions, green infrastructure surely is a nature-based solution. There's also natural nature and that natural capital that gives us many benefits. But we're also going to introduce a new, not new in the sense of how long it's been around, but to these types of discussions, biophilic design, which is really mimicking biophilia is our attraction to living things into nature. Just like when a nice day like this occurs, we're drawn to it. But also biomimicry, which green infrastructure has mimicked nature-based technologies, for example, like bioretention or biomimicry. So this is just a definition and how the beauty of these approaches really are pivotal in terms of what we call sustainability, environmental, social, economic, and now as we focus on purpose. So we're going to talk about the nexus here and why it's so important in terms of what we are doing to bring back the health of our people and our communities and not suffer the health of the planet, which of course we rely upon. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Seth to just sort of bring us into stormwater and green infrastructure.
Okay, Tom, thanks. And I'll just note that you're right, it's World Water Week because yesterday, the 22nd, is World Water Day. And I will also note that that's my birthday as well. So I was born, literally born to be to work in the water sector, and I was born in Minnesota too. That has a land of 10,000.
Born to swim in Minnesota.
Exactly, but there's something to be said for water ethic, and I think that is a driver culturally. So I'm going to take a little bit of time to focus on the stormwater sector, and then we're going to be jumping around a little bit, but it's all going to tie together. So I want to talk about stormwater and the evolution, especially because right now, or over the last 2,000 years, we've really we've been Romans. This is what I said. We've been Romans for a long time, or we've generated, we've urbanized, we've developed, we generate runoff, we try to collect it, we try to convey it as efficiently as possible. And I'm of the generation still that, fluid mechanics was all about being as efficient as possible, trying to make things go quickly, right? Get things off the landscape as quickly as possible. Sometimes you detain it and hold it to get a little bit of treatment, but a lot of that's about flood control. But that's been the traditional paradigm for stormwater and water resources management, whatever you want to call it, for a long time. What we're changing now, like Dominique talked about, are these natural solutions, bringing nature into our designs more so. So instead of gray roofs, we have green roofs. Instead of concrete lined ditches, we have natural ditches that convey and treat water. So they're multi-purpose as well. And then we have parking lots that used to generate a bunch of runoff. Now part of it actually acts as a sponge, right? All of these, we change our terms from collect, convey, detain to words like infiltrate and retention and retain. And that, denotes that we're talking about stormwater as a resource, as an opportunity. It's got all these multiple benefits and multiple functions. And that's really at the heart of what I think we're talking about here, because green infrastructure has all these benefits. And we'll talk more about that than all the studies. So next slide, please, Dominique. Thank you. So just in the regulatory sense, because we need to, a big major driver for stormwater, obviously, are stormwater permits, MS4 permits, combined sewer overflow permits. Whatever it is that we see, we're trying to address the problem of excess runoff and pollutants within our runoff. And so the driver oftentimes is the permit. So it's in our permit programs, MS4s, you can think of that's the municipal separate storm sewer programs, or drainage systems, as you would think of. They require public outreach and engagement. As you can see in this picture, this is part of what a stormwater manager's job would be, to go to a school, to meet with kids, to educate, to inform the public using kind of a watershed model. This is how stormwater affects their world. This is how it ties into their life. And that's something that's required. If you can't meet with people during COVID, you can't congregate, then you can't meet your permit requirements. So at a very basic level, in terms of regulations, you just couldn't do your job and that's still the case. And now we see schools starting to come back. But I have a 10-year-old son. They have similar type of programs. They didn't do that this year. So, and the reason that there's so much public engagement in regulatory programs for stormwater is because stormwater is such a public infrastructure. It's located across the landscape. It's in backyards. It's in transportation corridors. It's on rooftops. It's where we live. It's where we are. So because of that, it's on public and private property. So because of that, we need to be aware of this. And it's also, again, that's where we have an opportunity. But this is why we also have lots of stakeholders. When we have a public meeting, if we're going to build a stormwater infrastructure facility of some kind or practice, oftentimes you have to have meetings between the engineer, the scientist, construction folks, but also residents that are nearby, and others that represent the public sector, as an example. You can't have these stakeholder meetings, so therefore we've seen a lot of projects kind of come to a halt. And that's, again, we had a lot of momentum going, and now for a whole year we've basically taken things off. So that's a challenge. Not only that, once you have something installed, you have to inspect and maintain these facilities. That's a really central part of stormwater programs. and stormwater facilities, but inspections are always done in teams of 2 or more. And oftentimes you're working in a confined space. So you might be in an underground vault that holds water underground, as an example. That could be part of a stormwater practice system. In those situations, you can't do this during COVID. And again, so we've seen permits being delayed. We've seen projects be delayed. And this is a time when we really need to start investing in this. Next slide, please, Dominique. So another impact from COVID on the stormwater sector has been on economics and the funding capacity. Stormwater is what I'd say is not revenue resilient. It's not. It adds resilience. Stormwater infrastructure adds resilience, but it itself is not revenue resilient. What I mean by that is that there is, you can think of wastewater and drinking water as examples. They have utility fees almost ubiquitously, almost everywhere, right? Stormwater, only about 25 to 30% of regulated systems, communities that hold a stormwater permit, have a dedicated fee of some kind. And that's changing. New Jersey, that's changed, and with legislation, which is great. We've seen Pennsylvania, that's changed recently. So we're seeing an increase, but it's still the exception, and it's not the rule. That means that funding comes for stormwater programs comes from general funds. And general funds are tied to things like local sales tax. And local sales tax gets impacted when you have hotels that are empty and restaurants that are empty. So we've seen local economies, local governments, obviously significantly drop, just like we did see in the housing crisis in 2008. And they didn't come back for many years after that. So right now, stormwater budgets that were already hurting, frankly, are hurting even more now. What does that do? That creates uncertainty on investments in the future. That creates uncertainty in financing. If you don't know how much you're going to have to invest and repay for next year, that's going to limit. So there's a limitation, and this reduced local tax revenues has got impacts that are going to be felt, frankly, for years to come. Next slide, please, Dominique. And I think what's kind of hitting it close to home in New Jersey has done a great job at putting in place rules that are now literally in effect just this month on green infrastructure. This is pushing green infrastructure forward. We're talking about things like you see rain gardens, biodegradable retention facilities, vegetated green swales, pervious pavement, all the good things. This is now being pushed forward as a first consideration for new projects. That's great. However, now this is a time when we really need to be investing in nature. We're having these shocks to our system when it comes to funding and moving projects forward. So that's been a project. That's been a limitation. We're going to get past that, but it's been a bump in the road for us. So I don't know if Dominique, if you had anything else that you wanted to add on that, since I know that you're in the New Jersey. I'm in the Washington D.C. area right now. So Dominique, anything else you want to add on that?
No, just that I think we're looking forward to, progress in terms of seeing more green infrastructure implementation. It is tough during these times, but there's, I commend New Jersey DEP and New Jersey Future and so many organizations throughout the state that have provided support, Rutgers and others, on training and support to the municipalities. And, we're hoping to support that in our neck of the woods, right, Dibs? And in fact,
Yes.
let's figure out how we can get some students involved in some design or some opportunities there. So we'll follow up on that.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Okay, Don,
So,
take it
yeah.
from here, right? Yeah.
Yep. So let's, we were talking earlier, just before this started, about Zoom fatigue. And, this is no surprise. It's sort of, what's the next study? What's the next, unfortunately, police report? It's amazing how I see these little pop-ups from the news feeds that I have, about somebody that unfortunately went off, shootings, violence, more abuse, because people are, I'm not saying that's the reason, but with people inside, without the ability to get out, without, with the concern for the future, these are certainly, it's a time no one here has quite experienced, unless they were around at the time of the Spanish flu. It really challenges one's ability to be resilient. So actual studies being done right now, and I'm sure all of us in our worlds have had somebody reach out to talk about dealing with stress, meditation. Even those who have had COVID, we're seeing that there are some actual worse physical and mental, even forgetting memory. It's just unlike anything we've seen in some time in terms of the culmination of impacts, both mentally and physically. Well, studies have shown, and this has been for some time, that the connectivity and the restorative effects of nature on both physical and mental health. And Seth and I actually did an article on this, which we're happy to share. We've collected, quite a few of those studies. So if anybody's particularly interested in it, we can share that. So we're going to highlight just some, but there are many out there that have been done throughout the world, actually showing, based on the physical health disorder, how connecting those study groups to green in different ways. Even in a hospital room, there's there's a gallbladder study that I looked at. This relates to biophilic design, that they separated the patients, put them in two different rooms, two different sides of the hospital, one that had green, like access to the outside, a window, even in some cases, just a picture of a tree, and saw that not only was the group that had the green connectivity, did they heal significantly faster than the group that didn't, but they needed less painkillers than the groups that did not have that. So we remember No Child Left Inside, and learning and cognitive ability. This is all connected. Portland, Oregon really has been a champion in implementation of green infrastructure and green streets. So they've now had this famous C Street and other streets now for some time, where they have continued to conduct a variety of studies related to different benefits that come from having implemented or using green streets. So here's one that they found: the health of elderly populations improved because of the access to the green street. First, they're drawn to get out and walk more. They found that the green infrastructure also provided a connectivity with the community, and a sense of more safety, so that there was, that all fed into why there were more elderly people out on that green street walking, because they also felt safer. So actually, again, we can share these. These are all related to numerous studies. I just did a summary. Improved immunity, reduced cardiovascular disease and stroke, reduced adverse impacts that they looked at, diabetic, those who were on the brink of diabetes, as well as those who had it, and how to reverse the progress of the disease, reduced circulatory disease. Now think of COVID as with all of these. And for anyone that has looked at how you qualify for a COVID vaccination outside of the age requirement, It'll list some of these. Are you at risk? Do you have an immune depressed situation, right? Are you immune compromised? Any cardiovascular disease? That's all on that list. Obesity, that's on the list. Again, there was a study we looked at. In fact, they looked at adolescents, and again, those who had access to green for recreation, et cetera, were able to lose the weight a lot quicker and remain healthier. Morbidity and respiratory diseases, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, the Chan School study that showed why so many people, Black and brown people, have died from COVID and how it relates to their exposure. Greater longevity, senior citizens, pain control, name it. And this is not the complete list, but indeed there are studies that have proven out the benefits of green infrastructure. Here's an example. This one is actually inner city Michigan, near the River Rouge, the neighborhood of Boynton, which you can see it is a depressed inner city blighted neighborhood. Does anyone see green there? And this is not necessarily a picture in the winter time. This is actually representative of many of these inner city communities. In fact, there's a study we just went through that demonstrated the lack of green in most of these communities and urban heat island. But again, these are communities that tend to suffer disparate impacts due to pollution, air pollution, as well as water pollution and other environmental impacts. And the difference in the mortality rate for those who live in these communities, directly related. Again, the basis is, poor exposure, disparate exposure, poor health, lack of access to adequate health care, and then of course, extremely compromised and as well on the front lines for COVID. So here's an example. I mentioned the disparities as related to lack of green infrastructure in these inner city neighborhoods. And for those of you who don't know what urban heat island is, and there are different types of urban heat island impacts, but the plain and simple of it is how much hotter it is. And think of those areas with concrete, pavement, and they typically are at least 6 degrees hotter than the other areas. And you can see that little graphic on the right. On the left is Baltimore, which was evaluated. That's from USGS and NOAA data. This was from EPA. And looking at certain neighborhoods to compare green infrastructures. So on the left is the surface temperature. Obviously, the darker areas being representing the higher temperatures. And then on the right is income and also related to how much green infrastructure is there. But I think this is primarily an income map. Could be greener, I'd have to check that one. But you can see that the corresponding cooler areas on the left, the lighter areas, as compared to the darker green areas on the right. That darker green and up in the middle at the top is the maximum income area. So yes, once again, money rules in terms of a quality of life. This is that I refer to the Harvard Chan School of Public Health study findings, reported quite a bit in the news, evaluated over 3,000 counties in the US, actually looked at a variety of data sets and including education level, looked at a variety, related to demographics, and then of course, exposure. And particularly in this case, PM 2.5, which is fine particulates, and found a direct correlation, and then of course mortality due to COVID. And this was the first nationwide study to show a statistical link between those demographic populations in this particularly Black people, African Americans, and also Hispanic and Native Americans had the highest mortality rates, but they found African Americans because of where the predominant populations were and the predominant amount of air pollution and respiratory disease, which, by the way, I was at EPA as a career. We had that data some time ago from an EJ standpoint, looking at demographics and who suffered higher rates of respiratory disorders. You can imagine we're going to look at that if we're trying to support decisions on emissions. So this is not all new, but how it's packaged in as it relates to COVID is new and the first to show that direct correlation. Once again, I just mentioned Indigenous, Black, Pacific Islander Americans that have experienced the highest death tolls due to COVID-19. And if you can see that graph, you can see at the top, Indigenous, Black, Pacific Islands, and on the left is the number of people, and this is over time. So I'm going to turn it back over to Seth to revisit really something very key, particularly as it relates to infrastructure and green infrastructure, and that's the economic impacts.
Yep. Thanks, Tom. So, yeah, we're seeing a significant impacts, economic impacts already, as we outlined in the stormwater sector. Right, it's already underfunded, and it's funded through means that are more, or that are less resilient. There's shocks to the system, and so it's not just the amount of funding; it's the manner in which funding occurs or does not occur. But of course, we've got the impacts now that we see from coastal storms. Obviously, the New Jersey, New York area understands that with Hurricane Sandy that came through. But we're seeing more and more intense storms inland as well, not just coastal areas. So, we've got some information here about $70 billion in 2018 alone. The fourth warmest year. Of course, we see with higher, with warmer temperatures, warmer oceans, we're going to see these more intense storms. Hurricane Harvey was devastating in the Houston area, for example. So we're seeing more and more of these, and it's gotten to the point now where a lack of resilience planning is having an impact on the rating of the credit rating for cities. Moody's is an example, but there's others. Are seeing some of these coastal cities saying, as they'll see them as risks because they have not done their job to become more resilient to what's happening now, what's been happening, what is happening, and what's projected to increase even more in the future. And that's true in New Jersey as well as other places too. So, and what kind of investments should we make? Well, we should be making investments in green infrastructure as well. And again, so this is while we should be growing in this area, we haven't been, but now again, New Jersey is really turning the tables on this and making, or turning the corner, I should say, and making investments in green infrastructure in the future. But again, these economic impacts are going to continue to happen until we increase our resilience overall. Next slide, please, Dom. And if there's anything you want to add, Dom, always feel free to jump in. If I want to make sure we cover all our points here. So another thing to think about is, we just passed and put into effect the American Rescue Plan, close to $2 trillion. Dom mentioned, this is one of the largest such bills that's ever been made, and we're looking at another $3 trillion potentially with infrastructure investment. These are good things, obviously, and you can see all the provisions there. These are all needed, obviously. Direct payments to individuals who are struggling with job losses, for instance. we've talked about state and local governments. They've got some hurting budgets. So having money that goes directly to them is important. We could go down the line. Clearly, all of these things are important. But what we have to consider is first of all, there's no nothing about green infrastructure or water here, and hopefully that was done thinking that we're going to cover that in the infrastructure bill that'll be coming out hopefully this year. And I'll just say that I say hopefully because it's one of the things that my organization, the National Municipal Stormwater Alliance, focuses on is trying to advocate for more funding for stormwater. Oftentimes there's funding that's allotted for wastewater and drinking water, and stormwater is often left behind that way, or is the kind of the forgotten part of the water sector. And again, I've seen this. I was looking at this today, as a matter of fact, looking at some of the language of this bill, that it's kind of left off. It's a lot of focus on like a LIHEAP for water, right? So we know about the LIHEAP program that provides heating or subsidy or heating oil for those especially in the Northeast, those who are low income. They're talking about doing something similar for the water sector, but it was only focused on drinking water and wastewater. The stormwater sector is left out. So the point is that we're spending a lot of money. Hopefully we can get stormwater into that. But next slide, please, Dom.
And Seth, if I can just add here.
Yes, please.
Why, stormwater, addresses stormwater, it is that connectivity that can make or break. If we think about our water resources and also COVID, understanding that there's now the ability to determine how much COVID is happening in a community by looking at wastewater samples.
That's right.
And with combined sewer overflows, you're getting overflow of that contaminated sewage. Now think with COVID and running off onto our streets, onto our properties, and into our streams and our rivers, which also serve as our source water. Yeah. So, we've got to think of this more holistically. Not only that, but with green infrastructure, we can put reentry people to work locally. And we have great examples of where that's done. And we can clean up those blighted neighborhoods and return, that livability. Drinking water, wastewater needs are extremely important, but we're missing it. We're going to miss the ability to truly protect our water resources and enable safe and clean drinking water if we do not address stormwater. That also gives us these other benefits.
It's true, Dom.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No,
yeah, please. But I just wanted to second what Dom just said. The CSO communities, they are in danger, from this, because we know we excrete the COVID virus much before we are actually diagnosed with the disease. And so that basically forms the basis for wastewater epidemiology with respect to COVID, right? So in many universities, the dorms, we are analyzing wastewater to figure out if there is any contamination in the dorm that is not visible yet, right? So, there is no question about the fact that all the stormwater facilities are teeming with those viruses, although they are dead, but you are basically, when you get the CSOs, you are basically flooding your whatever those infrastructures are, you are flooding them with materials that contain COVID.
It's a great point. One thing to add real quickly is that the American Society of Civil Engineers, for the first time, included stormwater in the report card that just came out a couple of weeks ago, right, Dominique? And that's something that we've been advocating for a long time, but it got the worst grade it could get, I believe, that they gave out, which is a D, and that just shows the state that the infrastructures. And so clearly we need investment in those. It's really calling out for that. And the other thing is that, as Dominique mentioned, all these jobs that can come from green infrastructure and stormwater investment overall, we're talking like a 3-to-1 type of return, dollar for dollar, and kind of looking at an input output economic investment. So there's so many good reasons to invest in the water sector, and specifically really in stormwater, which is often left behind. So the thing is to think about all the large investments we're making. You can see that over time, we have the more investment that you make, the more that you have to pay in interest costs, right? So the thing that we have to keep in mind here is that by what this projected out to be by 2040, we're going to be actually spending more on our interests based upon our investments right now than we do for our combined for R&D, infrastructure, and education all combined. So there is a crowding out. There's only so much that we can spend our money on. So we need to think about this balance between what we're investing in now and what we're leaving out in other ways. So Dominic, again, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else in this area.
Well, this slide is a little scary to me.
It is.
When, and that's, what I really want to point out is we're talking about R&D. All right, how are we going to solve for these complex problems that status quo has not solved for, right? And Seth just alluded to the ASCE report card, which I was actually surprised infrastructure overall got a C. I don't know what raised it, but you know, that historically has been D. I'm glad to see it, but I'm curious. And how are we going to solve for it? How are we going to create solutions that are more circular, that don't have the adverse impacts as we look at climate and all of the challenges? That's R&D. Infrastructure, that's our foundation. We know that already. Look, we're already operating on 200-year-old, in some cases 300-year-old infrastructure. We're trying to fix 200 to 300-year-old infrastructure, and we got to leapfrog as we are talking about 2050. And the fact that we're all going to be living under different circumstances, and how do we ensure for resilience? And then education, no brainer. If we are going to be resilient, that is the very foundation of getting us anywhere in terms of a resilient society. What you didn't see, which the Harvard Chan School looked at, is educational levels. And indeed, the populations that have the highest degree of mortality, and honestly, unfortunately, it looks like no hope, had the lowest educational levels. And granted, we're going to have to just figure out how to get smart about that, but that's 2.5%. And then if you compare on the right, what we have invested in terms of the projected cost of getting us out of this pandemic, we're going to be paying for the right hand before, we're already paying for it. We're paying for the right hand. Now, who pays for it? Who pay and how we pay for it really depends on what's on the left, if you ask me. So that's why I said this slide, I had to put it up, but it does make me nervous. And we don't, Seth, I know we're running out of time.
Yeah.
And so that I just alluded to race and ethnicity and household income, and the fact that I talked about EJ and disparities in social justice. We really are our weakest link, and we've got to be able to activate and enable our complete workforce. It's all hands on deck. We can't continue to leave folks behind who can actually get us
right
ahead. And so again, here are major disparities that still exist and also are directly connected to what we are experiencing, and that we're trying to address with the recent passage of these different funds in this. And I just had to add, we still got a lot of people with, fewer people actually have health insurance now. 27, you can see 2012, 2010, 2011, look how it goes down in 2017, 2018. So I was just going to sort of quickly touch again on kind of back to the topic and why this really needs, it is being integrated. We're not giving sort of active conversation about it, but think about it. There are more people trying to figure out how they can meet with community in outdoor spaces. They're bringing outdoor spaces as much as they can to their own residential areas. That's not about any regulatory code. You know, we now know, right, that with more ventilation and still some distancing, people feel safer. And so you see more people outdoors. Here's an example. So these biophilic systems that are being designed around the world, actually, we know green roofs, they improve poorly ventilated space. So there's, and in fact, in my world at Corny Point, I was responsible for leading a team to ensure continuity of business. We got over 240 businesses under our roofs, and how we can use what I call nature-based systems in engineering to reduce reduce spread of COVID and better protect. So think of, you know, we heard about HVAC, and we heard about, I think everybody now knows, if you're in a space with anyone else in a car or somewhere else, ventilate. If you're in a building or an area, ventilate. And that's, you know, due to the ability of fresh air to not only dilute the virus, but there's something called bipolar ionization, which actually happens in pristine areas where you've got positive and negative ions, mountaintops, you know, waterfalls, anywhere, you know, what we have been able to monitor and observe, I'm saying the bigger we, is that in polluted areas, these positive and negative ions are less. There's significantly less of them. But what they do, for example, in this mimic technology, called BPI, is they actually attach to that RNA virus, and they disable it because they actually destroy the protein, the proteinase, the enzyme around it. What they also do is they attach to dust particles and anything else you have in the air, and they almost sort of agglomerate or aggregate so that they now are of a heavier weight and they fall out. And then you can clean those surfaces. But we have installed this system, and there are different types of BPI. We have an Atmos Air. And you're gonna hear more about that at stadiums. I'm seeing on cruise ships and hotel rooms, and it's continuous. And it works with the existing HVAC system. I think we're going to see more of these types of technologies coming around, and that's why I just wanted to point out this, you know, biomimicry, and also Edward O. Wilson wrote a book in the 80s about, he was a naturalist who actually took what had already been coined as biophilia and made a relationship to it and said it really is about our need to have that connection with life, all living things, and then the associated benefits. And there's a Sustainabl site if you want to check that out. So this is again, you know, the bipolar ionization as an example, biomimic technology that is rising as it relates to COVID, but it also is about indoor air treatment, and it occurs naturally. Also UV, think of UV and air. So these are all nature-based solutions that are saving us as it relates to this virus, which who knows what comes next. And it's doing it safely. These are our spaces at Corny Point. We are a well building. You're now hearing about healthy buildings, more about well buildings. And just wanted to point out that we've actually put this kind of thing into place. And I'll turn it over to Seth, and then I know that we're getting, Samir's reminding us about time. Seth had shared this slide when was this, Seth? This was the last, one of the last major pandemics people took to the park, the national park areas.
Yeah. This is just a quick, interesting look at what we were doing. So you can see that graph on the right side. We were not away from home, right? So that red line represents our trips away from home went down, obviously last March and April, severely because we all stayed home. We were in lockdown. And we didn't go to parks either. So that blue line is parks, and that could be a dog park, that could be a beach, something like that, as well as state and national parks. We all stayed home. We didn't know where to go. We didn't go out. But once we started to go out a little bit, you could see that red line start to increase a little bit. Where did we go? We went out to natural areas. We went out to green spaces. And this picture is from, I think it's from Yellowstone, I believe, back in the 1918 flu pandemic. And the same thing happened back then. So just like you see history repeat itself, we're seeing it repeat itself again. And I think the next slide is this is a study that just came out this year. We can share this with you, and there's a title that's listed there. But the point is that this looked at urban parks specifically, looked in New Zealand and Poland specifically. But the point is, during lockdown, you can see the rates were higher for both the number of people and the social, like the bubbles, when we all formed our bubbles of those that are networks that we worked, that we stayed with. Both the number of bubbles and the number of people went out going out to these parks increased. And then once the lockdown was done, we didn't go out to those as much. So that shows the value of these urban green spaces. And on the left side, you see those circles there. I'm sure you guys have seen that around. That was, I think, taken in from Brooklyn, where this is a place where we can go and feel safe and get that natural ionization that Dominique's talking about. And this shows more value in green space in urban areas, especially, is more green infrastructure. That's a good thing all around. So that was the point to those, Dominique.
Yeah, so we'll just conclude here. We know that we covered a variety of diverse topics, but again, we're in a state of complexity, integrated, and it's going to really mean we need to figure out how to respond smarter in an integrated way, and we certainly can't leave out our environment, the importance of our environment in returning health, as well how we ensure for what's next to come.